You're bold for someone so young. I didn't expect the evening to stay with me. It was supposed to be one of those casual gatherings, a mix of soft music, clinking glasses, and people pretending to be more interested in the conversation than the appetizers. I went because a friend insisted I should meet new people, which usually means standing in corners and nodding at small talk. Then she walked in. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, as if she already belonged there. She had that kind of presence that didn't need attention to draw it. Her laughter was warm, easy, and threaded through the chatter like a familiar melody. She wasn't trying to be the center of anything, she simply was. Our first interaction wasn't planned. I was reaching for a glass of water at the same time she did. Our hands brushed, a brief, electric contact, and she smiled with a polite apology that somehow felt more personal than it should have. Her voice was soft, steady. "Didn't mean to steal your drink," she said, eyes bright with quiet amusement. I remember stammering something about there being plenty more, trying to sound calm but probably failing. She tilted her head slightly, as though she found my nervousness endearing. That look, measured, playful, had weight. Later in the evening, we ended up in the same circle of conversation. She was telling a story about traveling alone after her divorce, a story filled with self-deprecating humor, courage, and just enough sadness beneath it to make you want to listen closer. When she spoke, people didn't just hear her, they felt her. I caught myself studying her gestures, the way she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way she leaned forward when someone else spoke, genuinely listening. Every movement was unhurried, deliberate. She carried herself like someone who had lived enough to stop pretending. At some point, she noticed me watching her. Her gaze lingered, assessing but not unkind. Then, with a small smile that reached her eyes, she said, "You're bold for someone so young." The comment hit harder than I expected, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it. There was teasing in her tone, yes, but also recognition. It wasn't a dismissal, it was an invitation, wrapped in amusement. I laughed, a little too quickly, and tried to play it off, but my pulse betrayed me. She just smiled again and turned her attention back to her wine, as if she knew she'd left a spark in the air on purpose. The rest of the night passed in a blur of background noise and half-heard conversations. Yet, every time I glanced around, my eyes found her, the curve of her smile, the calm poise of her posture, the faint scent of jasmine that lingered when she walked past. I didn't even know her name then. But as I left the gathering, that teasing line replayed in my mind, softer each time. "You're bold for someone so young." And for the first time in a long while, I wished I actually had been. It had been nearly a week since that evening, but her voice still echoed in my head, playful, warm, and layered with something I couldn't quite define. I told myself it was just a fleeting impression, the kind that fades once life resumes its ordinary rhythm. But ordinary wasn't as interesting anymore. Then, as if the universe had overheard the thought, I saw her again. It was late afternoon at a quiet cafe I'd stumbled into while escaping a sudden drizzle. The kind of place where time seems to move slower, soft acoustic music, the faint clatter of cups, and the smell of coffee rich enough to feel like comfort. I was halfway through pretending to read when I looked up, and there she was, seated near the window, absorbed in a book. She hadn't seen me yet. The light from the window painted her in soft gold, catching in her hair and tracing the delicate lines near her eyes, the kind that only appear when someone has laughed often. There was something grounding about her presence, like calm in human form. I almost didn't approach her. Almost. But she looked up at that exact moment, as if sensing the thought. Her surprise melted quickly into a slow smile. "We meet again," she said, closing her book. I smiled back, trying to sound casual. "I promise I didn't follow you here." "Good," she teased, "because I'd be disappointed if you made it that obvious." We ended up talking, first about her book, then about everything else. It wasn't forced, it felt like picking up a conversation we hadn't finished. She had this way of asking questions that made you want to answer honestly. She listened, not to reply, but to understand. And when she laughed, It wasn't polite or measured. It was genuine. Her name, I finally learned, was Elena. It suited her. Strong, timeless, quietly elegant. When the rain eased and she started gathering her things, I offered to walk her to her car. She hesitated for just a second before nodding. Outside, the world felt freshly washed. The air was cool, the pavement still glistening with puddles. We walked side by side, our conversation drifting between light humor and subtle pauses. At one point, our arms brushed, a small, accidental touch, and she didn't move away. Neither did I. At her car, she turned to face me. "You're full of coincidences," she said softly. "Or maybe good timing," I offered. She looked at me for a long moment, searching, thoughtful. Then her lips curved into that familiar, knowing smile. "We'll see." She got into her car, the door closing gently behind her. The faint scent of her perfume, something floral and understated, lingered in the air. As she drove away, I caught myself smiling like someone who just remembered a song they used to love. I didn't know what this was or where it might lead. But one thing was certain, seeing her again didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like the start of something quietly inevitable. Elena called me on a Thursday afternoon, her voice calm, but carrying a note of hesitation, as if she wasn't sure she should have. She was helping organize a local charity event for a community arts center, and one of the volunteers had dropped out. "You seem dependable," she said lightly, "and I could use an extra pair of hands. Unless you're too busy being bold somewhere else." I smiled at the familiar teasing, even though she couldn't see it. "For you? I'll make time." That Saturday, I met her at the venue, a small hall lined with canvases and fairy lights half strung along the walls. She was already there, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back loosely. She looked different out of her usual polished composure, softer, more real. When she turned to greet me, a few loose strands fell across her face. I don't think I'll ever forget the quiet grace of that moment. We worked together for hours, unpacking boxes, arranging decorations, and setting up tables. Every so often, she'd give me small instructions with that half-smile of hers, like she was testing whether I could keep up. But between the practicalities, something deeper began to take shape, unspoken, yet unmistakable. At one point, we took a break. She handed me a bottle of water and sat beside me on the stage steps. Her tone changed, slower, reflective. "I used to love events like this," she said, "before I got tired of pretending to enjoy the attention." I stayed quiet, sensing there was more. She told me about her marriage, not in bitterness, but in quiet acceptance. How two people could love each other once and still grow apart. How freedom, when it finally arrived, could feel both liberating and lonely. Listening to her felt like watching someone peel back layers of themselves they hadn't touched in a long time. There was a weight in her words, but also lightness, the kind that comes from finally breathing again. When she fell silent, I said softly, "You make everything look effortless." She turned to me, caught off guard by the sincerity. A faint blush colored her cheeks. "That's the trick," she murmured. "Make it look easy, even when it isn't." We went back to work after that, but something in the air had shifted, gentler, more familiar. When our hands brushed as we lifted a box together, she didn't pull away. The touch was brief, accidental maybe, but it stayed with me, the warmth of her skin, the quiet steadiness of her presence. Later, as we stood beneath the string lights testing their glow, she looked around the room and said, "You did well today." "We did well," I corrected. She smiled, really smiled, and for a fleeting second I saw something in her eyes that felt like trust. As we parted that evening, the lights still twinkling behind her, I realized what the day had been teaching me. Sometimes courage isn't in grand gestures or bold confessions, it's in the quiet patience of showing up for someone, without needing anything in return. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, wearing a simple navy dress that made her look quietly radiant. Not trying to stand out, yet somehow impossible to miss. Her hair was loosely pinned, a few strands framing her face, and her smile, calm, knowing, held that same mix of strength and softness that always drew me in. We didn't talk much during the event. She was busy managing everything, greeting people, thanking donors, making sure things ran smoothly. But every now and then, our eyes would meet across the room, and in that glance, there was something unspoken. A small reminder that we were both aware of what was quietly growing between us. By the time the evening wound down, most of the guests had gone, and the laughter had faded into a hush. I stayed behind to help her clean up, stacking chairs while she gathered leftover decorations. Outside, thunder rolled faintly, the first warning of an oncoming storm. "Looks like we finished just in time," I said, glancing toward the glass doors as rain began to fall. She laughed softly. "Maybe the sky decided to help us clear everyone out." Within minutes, the drizzle turned into a downpour, heavy, relentless. We stood beneath the canopy outside, waiting for it to ease. The air was cool and smelled of rain and distant earth. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly. Without thinking, I stepped closer, taking off my jacket. "Here," I said quietly, draping it over her shoulders. She hesitated, her eyes flicking up to meet mine. "You'll get soaked." I smiled. "I'll survive." For a moment, we just stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath over the sound of the rain. The city lights shimmered through the curtain of water, and time seemed to narrow to that single instant. Her hand brushed against mine, tentative but deliberate. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a wave through me, something fragile and powerful all at once. She looked up then, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "You really are bold," she whispered, the same words she'd teased me with before, but now they carried a different weight. There was warmth in them, and something dangerously close to affection. I could have said 100 things in that moment, but none of them would have fit. So I just held her gaze, steady, wordless, honest. Then, as if waking from a dream, she took a slow step back. "We should go," she said, voice barely above the rain. She handed me my jacket, her fingers brushing mine for just a second too long, and smiled, faintly, almost sadly. "Thank you for tonight." I watched her walk away, the sound of her heels fading beneath the rain. And even though the storm had soaked me to the bone, I couldn't feel the cold. Because for the first time, I'd felt her warmth, and I knew there would be no going back from that. The days after the storm felt strangely quiet. At first, I thought it was just the calm after the event, that natural pause when everything slows down. But soon, I realized something else had shifted. Elena's messages grew shorter, her replies delayed. The easy rhythm we'd fallen into, late-night talks, shared jokes, quiet understanding, had begun to fade into polite distance. I tried not to read too much into it. People get busy. Life fills up. But beneath that reasoning, I felt the weight of what she wasn't saying. When we finally met again, it wasn't planned. I saw her at the park one evening, sitting alone on a bench beneath a line of streetlights, her phone in her hand but her gaze far away. The sight of her, elegant, thoughtful, slightly distant, made something ache quietly inside me. I approached with hesitation. "You disappeared on me," I said, half teasing, half honest. She looked up, startled at first, then smiled faintly. "Did I? I suppose I did." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes held a sadness that words couldn't soften. I sat beside her. For a while neither of us spoke. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere nearby, children laughed faintly before their voices drifted away. It felt like the world had made space for our silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "You make me feel things I told myself were behind me." I turned toward her, unsure what to say. She kept her eyes on the ground. "It's not fair," she continued softly. "You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you, things to learn, people to meet. And here I am, trying to unlearn what I thought love was supposed to look like." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she wasn't too old for anything, that connection doesn't follow timelines or logic. But I could hear the fear beneath her calmness, the fear of being misunderstood, of being judged, of wanting something she thought she no longer deserved. So instead of arguing, I said, maybe what we're feeling isn't about what's supposed to happen. Maybe it's just what's real. That made her look up. Her eyes searched mine, cautious, hopeful, uncertain. You shouldn't have to carry my hesitation, she whispered. You deserve someone who meets you halfway, not someone who keeps stepping back. I shook my head, voice quiet but steady. I don't need someone perfect. I just don't want to lose what's already here. She smiled then, bittersweet and tired. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it is, I said softly. We're the ones who make it complicated. She exhaled, as if releasing something she'd been holding for too long. Then she stood. You're kind, she said. Too kind. And that's what makes this harder. Before I could respond, she placed her hand on my shoulder, light, fleeting, and walked away, her silhouette fading beneath the glow of the streetlights. I stayed there long after she left, listening to the soft hum of the evening. In that silence, I realized something painful but true. Sometimes love doesn't vanish in absence. It lingers, waiting quietly in the spaces where words dare not go. Weeks passed with only silence between us, the kind that grows heavier the longer it lasts. I tried to let her be, thinking maybe distance was what she needed. But the truth was, I missed her. Not just the conversations or the teasing, but the quiet steadiness she carried, the way her presence seemed to calm everything around her. Then, one afternoon, I saw her again. Same cafe. Same seat by the window. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining it, if my mind had conjured her out of longing. But then she looked up and saw me. This time, she was the one who smiled first. I hesitated, uncertain if I should interrupt. Yet when she waved me over, something inside me loosened. I walked to her table, every step slow, careful, unsure of what version of her I was about to meet. Didn't expect to see you here, I said softly. Maybe I was hoping I would, she replied, and there was a gentleness in her tone that disarmed me completely. We fell into conversation the way we always did, naturally, quietly, without pretense. It felt like no time had passed, and yet, everything was different. She looked at me differently now, her gaze steady but vulnerable, like she'd decided to stop hiding behind the safety of restraint. We talked about everything and nothing, her work, my plans, the way the weather couldn't make up its mind. Then, after a pause, she sighed and said, I owe you an apology. I shook my head. You don't owe me anything. But she continued anyway. I pulled away because I was scared. I thought I was protecting myself, and maybe you too. But all I did was make things colder. Her honesty caught me off guard. I'd spent so long trying to understand her distance that hearing her admit it out loud felt like sunlight breaking through after weeks of gray. I miss you, I said quietly. She smiled, small, sincere, a little sad. I miss you too. More than I wanted to. The air between us shifted. The noise of the cafe faded, replaced by the simple rhythm of our breathing. She reached across the table, hesitated for just a second, then placed her hand over mine. Her touch was warm, grounding, certain. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it felt like one. I don't know where this goes, she said, voice trembling slightly. I just know that when I'm with you, I stop feeling unfinished. I turned my palm upward, fingers gently closing around hers. Then maybe that's enough. Her eyes softened, glistening under the afternoon light. She exhaled slowly, like someone finally letting themselves exhale after holding their breath too long. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. We just sat there, hands intertwined, watching the light shift across the table as the day went on. And in that quiet moment, with the warmth of her hand in mine, the hum of soft music around us, and the smell of coffee in the air, I realized something simple but certain. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives gently, like sunlight through glass, quiet, steady, and exactly when you've stopped expecting it. It was early evening when we met again, a few weeks after that day in the cafe. The sun was beginning to sink, the sky painted in golds and soft violets, that fleeting hour where everything feels softer, as if the world is holding its breath. Elena had suggested a walk. Somewhere quiet, she'd said. So we chose the park near the river, a place neither of us had been in months. The path curved gently along the water, the sound of the current mixing with the rustle of dry leaves. She walked beside me, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, her expression calm. There was no tension this time, no unspoken question hanging between us. Just a quiet knowing. We talked a little, about the art center's next project, a new book she'd started, the small details of life that make conversation feel safe. But as the light dimmed, words seemed to fall away, replaced by a silence that felt full, comfortable. Every so often, our arms brushed as we walked, each accidental touch carrying more meaning than anything we could have said aloud. When we stopped at a small wooden bridge overlooking the river, she leaned against the railing, gazing at the reflection of the fading sky on the water. "You know," she said softly, "when we first met I thought you were just curious. A little too curious, maybe." I laughed quietly. "I was. Still am." She turned her head slightly, smiling at the honesty. "And I thought I was too old to be curious back." There was no trace of teasing in her voice now, only tenderness. I stepped closer, close enough that I could see the soft glimmer of sunset reflected in her eyes. "You're not too old for anything," I said. "You just forgot how much you still deserve to feel." For a moment, she didn't speak. The breeze lifted a strand of her hair, brushing it across her cheek. I reached up instinctively to tuck it back, my fingers lingering near her skin. She didn't move away. Instead, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile that carried every unspoken thing between us. "Still bold," she murmured. "Only with you," I replied. She laughed, that quiet, familiar sound that had first drawn me in, and rested her hand briefly against my chest. I felt her warmth through the fabric, the steady rhythm of her touch syncing with my heartbeat. We stood like that for a while, the world fading around us, just the two of us, and the quiet hum of the river below. There was no declaration, no promise of forever. Just peace. When we finally began to walk back, the lamps along the path flickered on, casting soft pools of light over the fallen leaves. She slipped her hand into mine, gently, naturally, and neither of us said a word. Some stories don't need grand endings. They end the way they began, quietly, sincerely, with a feeling that lingers long after the last word is spoken. As we reached the end of the path, she looked up at me and whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe being bold isn't so bad after all." I smiled, giving her hand a light squeeze. "Only when it's worth it." And in that simple, unhurried moment, walking beside her beneath the soft glow of evening, I realized it had always been worth it. Every glance, every pause, every breath between us.